It's not just a movie trope or something you'll see in a true crime documentary you decide to watch at 2 in the morning. People have been doing cannibalism for thousands of years, well before we were a collected society, and likely before we were even people. Nowadays, it's obviously pretty frowned upon. No one out there thinks Jeffrey Dahmer was doing some sort of net positive. And whilst we can concretely say that he likely did it due to psychopathy and certain genes of mental illness, there's a whole broader area of reasons as to why humans have been eating each other since we existed, and to why we find it disgusting now, or at least I hope you do. From simply survival to biological drives and even genetics, there's many reasons as to why some people even eat each other now. So let's look at them. Here's the insane nature of cannibalism. So, cannibalism is one of those ultimate human taboos, but before it was a headline in a Netflix show or you even glancing on it at Reddit late at night, it was something far more normal, maybe even necessary. You see, we didn't simply invent cannibalism, we kind of inherited it. There's actually loads of archaeological evidence suggesting that one of our ancestors living over 800,000 years ago, called Homo antecessor, frequently practiced it. Not part of some weird fetish, but routine survival. In fact, researchers studying early human bones in Spain found signs of butchering of which look eerily similar to those on animal remains. The meat, well, human, obviously, but the markings were precise. It wasn't rage and killing in combat, it was dinner. And it didn't quite stop there. Our famous Neanderthals also seemed to eat one another. Their bones too showed signs of being cracked open for even marrow. To us, you probably, and I sincerely hope, couldn't even imagine doing that to another person. To them, it's all about the gains, bro. When food is scarce and you're looking down a bitter Ice Age winter, the unthinkable becomes the only option. It's the same reason modern survival cases such as the Donner Party or the Andes plane crash in 1972 ended in the same grim decision. But even then, in lots of the world, cannibalism isn't just about survival, it's actually spiritual, ceremonial, and weirdly honourable. We can take the 4 people of Papua New Guinea, in which endocannibalism is the most common thing associated with the tribe. This is the ritual of eating deceased relatives, which is regarded as a final act of respect. In this case, again, it's not rage, it's actually love. Consuming parts of the dead is a way of absorbing their life force and kind of keeping them within the tribe. However, this custom led to the spread of a fatal disease called Kuru, a prion disease, which I've actually covered before on my channel, so I'll leave a link there if you're interested. It's an awfully similar disease to those like mad cow disease, and it's just horrific. The main tragedy is, these people weren't monsters though, they were just mourning. And then you've got instances like the Aztecs. It's often depicted that they're all sadistic, bloodthirsty sacrifices, but even their cannibalism is argued by some scholars to have somewhat of a practical root. Mesoamerica did not have many large domesticated animals at the time, so consuming the flesh of sacrificed captives may have helped their nutrition. Again, for the gains, bro. Obviously religion played a huge part, kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So if you're wondering why we famously eaten one another, well, the answer unfortunately isn't quite a simple one. Sometimes hunger, religion or tradition. It's not always been about cruelty. But something has clearly changed, because whilst our ancestors viewed it as just another option to survive, we don't. It's enough to trigger those alarm bells in our heads and those red flags that you see on Tinder. So why have we changed? Okay, so we've established that cannibalism has been around for absolutely ages, but what about now in the present? Why do some people in a world full of people delivering delicious food right to your door still want to eat their fellow man? Well, modern cannibalism kind of differs in categories from the other ones mentioned prior. We've got ritualistic, cultural, and the most interesting one to talk about, pathological cannibalism. Now, this is where it gets really psychological. You see, cannibalistic serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer weren't eating people out of hunger, as is kind of a given. Motivations like that stem from psychological disorders, primarily paraphilias, sexual conditions where arousal is tied to unconventional stimuli, and in some cases, psychopathy. As a fun fact for you, many modern-day cannibals report feelings of control, domination, or even intimacy when consuming their victims. Dahmer famously said eating his victims made them a part of me, perhaps never to be without attention some sources say he was devoid of as a child. And from a neurobiological standpoint, things can get even weirder. Studies have shown that individuals with psychopathic traits often have reduced activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear, empathy, and processing moral decisions. I've also done another video on that coincidentally with a really interesting patient called SM, living without an amygdala. As well as this, the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for impulse control and long-term planning, is often also underactive. In other words, the very mechanisms making you recoil at the idea of cannibalism, i.e. guilt, disgust and inhibition, are often dialed down or even absent in cannibals. But we can make this even more disturbing, okay? There's evidence that this violence and dominance can stimulate reward pathways in certain individuals, specifically the mesolimbic dopamine system. Basically, if you associate eating human flesh with that pleasure, power or sexual gratification, your brain will get positively reinforced like it is with food or even drugs, making you do it again. And then there's the moral disgust, which, believe it or not, isn't universal. This actually came as a surprise to me too. Whilst most of us are hardwired to find this pretty gross, this is also conditioned, albeit socially. In societies where it is taboo, just merely thinking about it can activate brain regions like the insular and anterior cingulate cortex, the same areas involved in disgust and pain. But in cultures where it's accepted, like the tribes in Papua New Guinea, these brain regions don't actually activate at all. So why do people still do it then? Sometimes yes, your brain is wired differently or even trauma. Sometimes it's both, and nature and nurture together blur empathy, distorting arousal and rewiring morality. But based on where we were a few hundred years ago, that still doesn't really explain why now the rest of us find it revolting. So, why does cannibalism provoke such an intense visceral reaction even in hypothetical scenarios? The answer lies less in danger and more in deep-rooted psychological disgust mechanisms shaped by both evolution and social learning. Let's again begin with that moral disgust, which has been extensively studied in psychology. Unlike core disgust, triggered by things like bodily fluids and rotten food, moral disgust arises when we witness violations of societal norms. According to a study in 2007 by Rosen, cannibalism frequently ranks amongst the highest disgust elicitors. Not because it's unhygienic, but because it violates our sense of moral order and personhood. This ties into empathy and theory of mind. Neuroimaging studies shows that imagining harm to another person activates areas like the medial prefrontal cortex and anterior insula, regions linked to emotional processing and empathy. So when you eat someone, even in death, you're essentially removing their identity, reducing a once living being to a source of food. This is what a lot of vegans believe when formally eating animals, especially when shaped into things like nuggets. That collapse of other versus self feels not just wrong, but psychologically destabilising. Our revulsions is also a form of in-group boundary protection. A 2014 study from Aero et al. Found that moral disgust evolved in part to protect social cohesion. It threatens the very groups of civilizations and that contract we've all kind of got with one another to not eat one another. Breaking it is kind of admitting you're a rule breaker and to be shunned. And even fictional cannibalism evokes similar effects. A 2016 experiment showed people simply imagining cannibalism caused an influx of cortisol to enter their bloodstream, which is the stress hormone. And even then we got the concept of symbolic contamination. Research in moral psychology shows that even if meat is ethically sourced and cooked, if you're simply told it's human, even though you're going to be pretty certain it's not, like what kind of study would give you human meat, the chances are you'd still refuse it. It's not a practical revulsion, it's symbolic. Paul Rosen coined this as the law of contagion. Once something is associated as being gross and impure, it cannot be cleansed. In this sense, cannibalism doesn't just gross us out, it psychologically taints all it touches. And that's likely why it's so incredibly fascinating. Studies on morbid curiosity show that people are drawn to taboo topics, especially when they're rare, dangerous, or even challenge identity. It's just natural. Cannibalism sits across all three of these. Our disgust keeps us distant, but our curiosity keeps us watching. So there we pretty much have it. Cannibalism is a complex thing that we used to do all the time, but we stopped so we can all be friends and love each other, with dissidents possessing biological issues and nurture problems being super frowned upon and cast aside. But tell me, what do you think about cannibalism? Let me know in the comments down below. Maybe you're actually a cannibal looking for tips. If so, shoo, go away. And if not, thanks for watching. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed. It's free and it really helps me out. See you next time.